Hello, I'm Lindsay Johnson, Fiscal Sponsorship and Communications Manager at Southeast Uplift. Thank you for joining us today. This is our fifth session in the 7-part House of Development webinar series presented by and in partnership with COGEO. This session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. You're welcome to have your camera on or off, whatever is most comfortable for you. We have enabled captions. If you have any additional access needs, feel free to post those in the chat. We ask that you remain muted during the presentation and save questions for the end. We have reserved time for a brief Q&A. Our sixth session will be in a few weeks on Wednesday, August 23rd from 4 to 5 p.m. That will be focused on planned giving. Now I'm going to hand the mic over to our presenter, Chelsi, to introduce herself.
Thank you, Lindsay. Well, great to be here. And yeah, thanks for that introduction. So as Lindsay mentioned, I am Chelsi. I am Director of Client Services at COGEO. And for a little background on us and what we do, COGEO is a consulting agency for the nonprofit sector. And we specialize in providing advice and direct support services to really help accelerate the development and fundraising growth of different 501c3 organizations. So our focus lies primarily with the small to medium-sized nonprofits. That's really where we found that we can have the most impact and make the greatest difference. So our goal is really to catalyze organizations with grand visions and grand missions to really help them meet those goals. And we have clients spanning across the United States and collectively have over 40 years of fundraising experience. And throughout our journey as a company, we've successfully raised hundreds of millions of dollars for over 100 nonprofit organizations spanning various sectors. All right. So now that you have a little background on us and what we do, let's dive into this session. All right. So first, this is just a little roadmap of where we're at and where we're headed. So again, we're in our fifth session of the 7-part House of Development webinar series. This one is focusing on major gifts. Right. So major gifts. So here's the House of Development, and you might find this diagram familiar if you've joined our previous lessons. But as a reminder, the House of Development is a tool created by COGEO to conceptualize the building blocks of a successful 501c3 and explain why development is so crucial in achieving your organizational goals. And this is really intended to be looked at from the bottom up. So for a little background context before we move forward, you'll see the path or kind of walkway here is really encompasses communications and marketing. So it includes things like public relations, your website, social media, e-newsletters, and annual reports. And as you enter the house, you'll be on the first level here, which is annual giving and events. And this first floor is really what we consider retail. So it's unrestricted giving typically. And as you enter this second floor, you'll see corporations, which we discussed in our previous session, and major gifts and planned gifts. So the second floor is really non-retail. So typically it's restricted giving. And you'll see here, the major gift room is right in the middle of the house, and that's by intent. We really consider it the heartbeat of fundraising. So during this session, we'll talk about major gifts, best practices, and really explain why it is so critical in achieving your fundraising goals. All right, so now here's an outline of what we're going to accomplish today. And we have really 3 major goals. First is understanding what a major gifts program is and how to evaluate its ROI, which is just return on investment. Second is connecting major gifts activity and how it's fueled by the lower floors of the smart home, and in turn fuels other rooms of the House of Development, which is really important. So you may hear me mention smart home. I've mentioned it previously in other sessions, but the smart home is really just the House of Development plus technology. So websites, data management systems, social media, so technology like that. And last goal here is understanding how technology and data management practices are applied in a major gifts program. Right. So now let's define what a major gift is. So there's really two core elements in defining a major gift. The first is who the entity in question is and what amount the gift is. And let's first start out with the who element. So this is really individual, personal, one-on-one engagements. That's really the only methodology for major giving. It has to be on that individualized level with each donor. So which individuals or entities are we talking about? And before I move on, you may hear me mention entities and individuals interchangeably. In this context, I'm using entities to encompass households. So sometimes the individual is part of a couple, or it's the couple is donating together. So that just encompasses the household. So the term we use, AAA prospects, that really helps us understand the characteristics of a major gift individual or donor. And it's really just a mnemonic device that will help you remember AAA. And that is, I'll walk through each A and how it relates to the major donor. First A is affinity. So this is critical. Without affinity to the agency, it's really difficult to engage an individual by proxy or other ways. You have to really try to make them care about what you do. So there really has to be affinity at the start. The second is access. So you have to think about, do they have access to other funding sources in the community? For instance, maybe they sit on the board of a foundation or a trust. Maybe they have a lot of just connections to individuals in the community. They can make introductions. Maybe they're involved with a company you could approach for a sponsorship. So you want to think about things like that in line with those kinds of different connections they can make. And the last A here is affluence. So are they themselves affluent? Do they have wealth to make a larger scale gift? So that is a AAA prospect and really the key characteristics you want to consider. So just to reiterate, affinity has to be present. Access is great if it's possible, and there should be affluence. Again, just wealth or money involved with the individual. So now for a little bit of psychology, there's really 7 phases of philanthropy. This is based on studies. So psychology behind it, there's really 7 types of donors. That's the communitarian, the devout, the investor who really just wants to see an ROI, return on investment, which we're seeing more and more of these types of donors. Next is socialites, altruist, the repayer. So this is someone, for instance, who may have benefited from financial aid in a college, and then they set up their own financial aid fund once they've done well, or maybe they donate to their university. So someone along those lines who's repaying something that they received in the past. And the last is the dynast. So this is multiple generations of wealth being passed through. So these are folks with intergenerational wealth. All right. So now moving on to the amount element of a major gift. So how do you define a major gift in a given agency, since all agencies have pretty wide array of budgets, and the range can really be dramatic within industries. So there's the budget of a multi-state hospital or a research university is going to be much different than, say, a small local food pantry. And so there's really a formula that we've developed to determine a major gift for any given organization. And that is essentially just 0.1% of your annual fundraising budget. So the idea is that if you can raise 1,000 of those gifts on average each year, you've essentially made up your annual budget. So if your budget is $200,000, for instance, the major gift is going to be cutoff is going to be $200. If your annual budget is $500,000, the major gift is going to be $500. So how do you obtain major gifts? And essentially, they're just moved up from the first floor of the House of Development through, for instance, annual giving or events into the second floor because they have, for instance, more capacity. And they initially gave, maybe a smaller donation at an event, and you steward that, and then they give a larger donation moving forward. Right. So on to our next slide here. which really illustrates the importance of individual donors, specifically major gifts. And this is a diagram chart that I've shown previously, but it's really important and helps give us context for really each of our sessions and how it fits into overall fundraising. So as you can see from this chart, individuals drive a little over 67% of development dollars, which is really significant, of course. But within that statistic, about 50% of that 67%, so you can think about it, about 33% overall, is driven by just 5% of giving households. So that's really important and illustrates the importance of major donors. They provide, just that 5% of individuals provide 33% of the total pie. So that's nearly double the foundations, 8 times corporations, about 3 times bequests. So really want to make sure that you understand the importance of major gifts, and another reason why it's center of the House of Development. All right, and here's some more statistics for you on our next slide here. And this illustrates what a moves management program and how important it is. So I'll talk a little bit more about moves management and what that means, what that entails. But for just this context for this slide, moves management is just a term used to describe stewardship and interaction with major donors. So you'll see here, having a consistent moves management program obtains better results in terms of year-to-year giving. So you'll see that 91% of organizations that use consistent moves management programs or moves management process report meeting their major gift fundraising goals. So really significant there. That gets cut nearly in half when you don't have a process. It is a little bit better if you're using a process, but maybe inconsistently. So really shows how important mechanisms and systems are in a moves management system and to really have a successful major gift program. So again, having a process is great, and having a consistent process is even better. Okay. So now on to elements of a major gifts program. And again, we'll talk about moves management a little bit later in this presentation. But first, talk a little bit about elements of a major gifts program. So there are a few key elements here. First is a case statement. So you may have heard terms that are similar, case for support, maybe case study. So case for support, for instance, is what is tested during a feasibility study for a capital campaign. But a case statement is what is leveraged in a major gifts program, and what I really want to focus on for this conversation. So a case statement describes things like an organization's mission, history, programs, achievements, future plans, and financial needs as it relates to the current major gifts program. Can also have a deck or a case statement specific to a capital campaign. So just centering it around the financial needs for your specific request or program. So we strongly advise that if an agency is not in a capital campaign, that they implement a major gift program within their fiscal year. So you have the program going year round. And the case statement is a just comprehensive tool in development. It does a really great job outlining your programmatic or capital needs. And you can find some examples in the link provided in this presentation on COGEO's website. You can also find some great ones online just through Google searches to give you an idea of what you need to be including in your organization's case statement. But the statement should always end, towards the end, have a slide or a page dedicated specifically to your funding needs and the funding opportunity. Second key element is leadership, which is really critical. So this is, for instance, the executive director, director of development, communications, marketing, board, your volunteers, advisory groups, which are just representatives of communities that need to be impacted and can connect you, friends or ambassadors to your agency. So you can see all the ways that volunteers can really participate and help lead, as well as staff. The third element is a robust cultivation and stewardship plan. So I'm going to talk about stewardship and cultivation in a bit more detail in a future slide. So I'm going to skip diving into that too much for now, but just a little preview of what's ahead. Now, moving on to our next slide, what are some best practices of a major gifts program? And as you can see from this diagram, it's really a cyclical process and occurs on an annual basis. So how does it work? First, you have to identify prospects. This then triggers from other parts of the house. So I've talked about the upward funnel effect of the smart house of development in previous sessions. So for instance, let's say someone attends an event, which is the first floor of the house, and gives what is considered a major gift, then they merit further research. And same thing if someone gives a major gift through, for instance, an annual appeal. So that is a great way first to identify your prospect. And second step in this process is researching those prospects. So this can be done using a wealth screening process, which is what we use for all of our clients. And it's great because it provides actual net worth data on each entity or individual being researched. And once this research has been done, then you'll want to prioritize your prospects. And if you want to learn a little bit more about wealth screenings, talked about that, I believe, in our second session. We use Windfall for all of our clients. And I reviewed a sample screening of that in, I believe, our second or third session. So you can refer to that for a little more detail. But essentially, it gives you a lot of great data on the individual's net worth and their giving history to really understand more. And I will say, I know screening companies, typically there's an expense involved if you can't afford it at your stage of development. Sometimes simply searching the individual can help you understand their net worth. Potentially they've given to other entities in the past that might be in those organizations' annual reports or websites. So you can understand a little bit about the giving capacity that way as well. Next step here is the prioritization of prospects. So we've talked about the AAA characteristics in our last slide. So again, stands for affinity, access, and affluence. And affluence is the characteristic that is identified through the screening. So again, running the wealth screening is going to help you understand the net worth and giving potential. So essentially, you provide a third-party entity with information on your donors and membership, and they run a screening which provides data intelligence and includes things like net worth and historical giving patterns. So to do this effectively, you really need to collect as much information as possible on the individual, specifically their address. Most screening companies can't really run an effective screening without the address to really pinpoint the individual. And great way to obtain addresses is just through potentially events, having them RSVP, requesting also address to send them thank you notes or postcards. So different ways of gathering that information is critical. And this is a really key element you'll want to consider at the beginning phases of starting a relationship with someone as well for annual giving purposes. So when they first make that transaction, you'll want to try to obtain as much data as possible at that very start. Okay, so our next slide here details moves management. So this is the cultivation of the donor. All right, so from the research you conducted on your donors, once you know that the entity is capable, what the entity or individual is capable of, and they know they have affinity for your agency since they made a gift in the first place. How does move management work to really cultivate that donor? First, you want to obtain the meeting. And this has to be really donor-centric, the outreach and how they want to meet. If they prefer email. If they prefer text, make sure to text them or give them a call if they prefer that. And if you find no one on your staff know the donor, you'll want to branch out to your board members or other volunteers to really learn more about the individual before you reach out, to make sure you reach out and optimize that outreach. And if they're known to you as the donor, then it's really just setting up the one-on-one in-person meeting. So how do you prepare for the meeting? That's going to involve understanding what their affinity is. and what their access is as well. And because you have the wealth screening, ideally, you know what their affluence is and their giving potential. And again, if you don't have the wealth screening, potentially having a little bit of background on past giving to other organizations is great going into the meeting. So once you've obtained the meeting and set the date, which can also often be the most difficult stage, just trying to pinpoint people can be hard, but once you get the meeting set, then you need to develop a meeting execution plan. So you need to think about who's going to attend. Is it going to be one individual, two individuals? And that really depends on how you're seeing in like from their preferences, you know, what their preference is in terms of who's going to be at the meeting. So if there's someone who's really focused on programming, you might want to bring someone from your program staff. So essentially what you need to do is reverse engineer who the attendees are going to be from your agency. And then from there, you need to determine the roles and responsibilities of those attending. So the beauty of these meetings is that the case statement really does most of the pitch for you. And the case statement, if you recall, is a comprehensive design document outlining your mission, goals, programs, funding priorities, all that really critical information. So you want to make sure you bring the case statement with you, either as a digital option, so you can bring your laptop and pull it up there, or a printed version of the deck, or both if you want to leave behind something for them to flip through. And the purpose of the meeting isn't to sell your agency organization, but rather just demonstrate your needs and priorities. The owner has taken the meeting. They know what's expected, and you really need to fulfill those expectations. They're expecting you to make the ask and discuss your organization. So you want to make sure that you really do make a real solid ask. You know, we've heard from organizations that set meetings with major gift donor prospects and they don't make the ask. Maybe they back out or they're you know, hesitant, and the donor is actually upset because they were expecting the ask. So want to make sure that you actually make a financial ask and request. All right, so if you have or if you have two people at the meeting, so two people from your agency, for instance, you want to make sure that you also have the roles outlined. So one person really has to be the storyteller who outlines the case statement. And the other, which is generally taken on by the executive director, is the person who's making the direct ask. So once you've gone through the case statement, answered any questions the donor has, and you feel it's the right point in the conversation, go for the ask. So once you make the ask, what are some of the outcomes? Invariably, you're going to get an answer, and that could be yes, maybe, or no. And no isn't necessarily bad. It may just be that they're tapped out for the year, but they're open to being asked again next year. So don't just take the no and walk away. Want to see if maybe they're open to being asked again, or if there's another way that they may be willing to get involved. Just continue stewarding the relationship and cultivating it. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit too about the ask and different ways of making it. So essentially, there's really two ways to conduct a financial ask. First is you may have a specific number attached to it, and this could occur over a number of years, and it goes something along the lines of, you know, and we're really hoping that given your interest in this particular program at our agency, you'll consider giving a pledge of $50,000 over 5 years or $10,000 per year. So if you're going to make something, an ask like this with that financial, specific financial number associated, the key is really to remain silent afterward. The donor will likely need a little time to process it and think about it, but she will come back with an answer. You just need to fight any impatience or nerves that you might have in making it. So just be silent after you ask and just let them think it through. Second way of making the ask is for cases that when you may not have a particular number or amount in mind. So the messaging is going to go something more like, and we're grateful for your interest in our agency and in this program in particular. We're hopeful that you and your partner will consider a donation this year at whatever level you're comfortable. So the key here is whatever level you're comfortable. And if it's an urgent campaign with maybe a deadline, maybe you really need funding before end of year, you can include something along the lines of, at whatever level you're comfortable, but we're really hoping you'll consider a stretch gift this year, given we're under pressure to meet our deadline. So those are really the two main best practices we recommend. There is a third that I'll cover, and this third one is specifically for board members. So if they're meeting with an individual and insist they should be the one making the ask, and they're not really afraid of the blowback effect, which is essentially when you ask someone for money and they say, yeah, we'll make a donation, but only if you donate to my charity, whose board I also sit on. So this method really isn't recommended. We don't recommend that board members make financial asks, but if a board member is really insisting for some reason, the language should be something like, I want you to consider joining me and making a charitable contribution to this great agency on whose board I sit. So that can really just open up the conversation and a little bit potentially avoid that blowback effect. All right. So before I move on, I also want to leave you with another question that you should ask of every major donor during these meetings following the financial ask. So critically, you'll also want to say, and now that you know that what we've been doing and you're considering a gift, who in your network would also feel as good as you do about being introduced to our organization? Is there anyone in your network who has affinity for our work? So that's really how you grow your major gifts program. And wealth really runs with wealth. Wealthy people are usually friends with other wealthy people. So this is really key in expanding your network. So it's a huge element of major gift meeting, major gift meeting as well, because studies have shown that prospects are almost always generated from current donors. So asking for money is easy once you do it a few times, if you haven't before. But being tactical after that initial ask is really important in the process of growing your donor base. You don't want to just end it at the financial ask and walk away from the meeting. All right. So next step here is the post-meeting stewardship. So it's really important to communicate and make sure that you're using proper stewardship methods following the meeting. So making sure that you are reaching out to the person after the meeting to just follow up and thank them, follow up to on any action items. If maybe they said, maybe we'll donate and you need to think about it, make sure to follow up with them. All right. So this next slide outlines best practices for the stewardship as it relates to moves management. So it's really ongoing stewardship via a moves management plan. And what we do is impose a stewardship calendar. So for context, stewardship really just entails informing donors what's happening at the agency subsequent to their investment. So say a donor has given you an unrestricted gift of, let's say, $5,000 in December. So to steward that gift, you'll want to set a reminder or task for yourself in your CRM, which is Customer Relations Management System. So things like Salesforce or Blackbaud, or just setting at least, calendar, email, anything that's going to help you remember whatever system you're using. Make sure you implement a reminder for yourself. So you want to set a reminder. So to go out every 3 months to reach out to the donor with a stewardship touch. So 3 months out in March, in this case, if the donor donates in December, you'll want to write them a note saying, because of your investment with us this quarter, we were able to do X, Y, Z. Thank you so much. In June, you'll do the same thing. Reach out with a note. This quarter, we were able to do X, Y, Z. And it can be even the same things as the previous report or different things, just making sure that you're keeping in touch with them and giving them those short updates. Then in September, it'll be, again, the same thing, but in this case, you can end it with, we look forward to meeting you sometime later this year to just bring up to speed in person. So this is going to be a thank you meeting, and you'll also want to work on setting up another gift. So it's going to be major gift meeting, thank you, touching base in person, plus another financial ask. All right. So all this stewardship is really important because it sets you apart from the competition. So a lot of other 501c3s aren't doing this level of stewardship. Typically, what these organizations are doing is just sending a generic thank you note and calling it a day. So it really integrates you with the individual, keeps you top of mind, makes them feel like they're really making a difference. All right. So now also one note to make, if it's not a big gift, maybe it wouldn't be considered a major gift. You'll want to thank them immediately after their gift and consider following up with them on a quarterly basis still. But the updates will be more general rather than focused on how their donation was allocated. So maybe just focusing on a specific program if you know their interest, or just a general organization null update. So it's great to do for all donors. You really want to go a little more high level, which with your major donors, but it's a great additional touch because some of your smaller donors also have capacity to become a major donor. All right. So tools for stewardship. There's a lot of different tools that you can deploy for this process that can really make it easier for you and more streamlined. Because you want this done on a donor-centric basis, you'll want to use methods that the donor prefers. So if you know they like email, use email. Again, if you know they prefer text, use text. So if possible, you want to gather that information ahead of time so you know what the donor prefers. Typically, email is a good default, though, if you're not sure. All right. So now diving into more advanced practices in major gifts. First, triangulation strategies. So triangulation is really key in donor-centric major gifts, gift activities, and it's really relevant for corporations, foundations, and other high net worth individuals, as well as governments. So what is triangulation? Let's say you've identified a corporation or high net worth individual or foundation of interest. You've done your research, you know they have affinity, maybe they've demonstrated affinity to a group similar to you, but say you don't know anyone at the agency or entity. The next step here would be to find individuals who are well known to you and who know the entity and who can make an introduction. So keep in mind here too that foundations and corporations are made of people, which means you can look for connections. Maybe someone in your network knows someone who's a staff at the corporation, or maybe sits on the board of a foundation. So for instance, let's say you've identified specifically a foundation, and you first need to determine the procedure for the application process, of course, but you'll next need to get a list of the foundation staff and board. So you'll then want to vet this list with your own staff and board members, and really anyone else in your network. So for instance, volunteers, folks in your advisory group, close friends, close supporters. You'll want to send that list over to them, see if there's any connections that you can leverage. And this really helps, talked about this in our previous session about foundation outreach, but really helps you steward the application when you submit. Okay. So now let's take a look at some case studies to illustrate some of these points and best practices, just to bring them together in real life examples. So first here is Empower Me Academy, which is a client I've referenced before, one of our current clients. But as a reminder, for some context, they are a youth basketball organization based in San Francisco that focuses on developing student leaders through sports, specifically basketball. So they provide basketball training and mentorship programs. And they really emphasize holistic development alongside athletic excellence. So really unique organization. They have really excellent leadership. And during our events session webinar in the past few weeks, I discussed their signature EmpowerFest event. And this event really extends beyond just fundraising through the event into their major gifts program. So in their first year of the event, and they'll be hosting their third annual event this year, which is great. They presented their first Community Impact Award to one of their largest donors. So this was just an award they developed to really celebrate someone in their network. So they provide it to different supporters each year. But their first year, they supported it again to their largest donor, whose son really benefited from EMA's programs and went on to actually join the organization's board. So this recognition really highlights the personal connection and transformational impact EMA has on individuals and really enhanced their Major Gifts program and fostered a deeper connection between them and their supporter. So it was really important. The supporter felt very honored. He's high net worth, was on a trip, I think, somewhere in Cabo, like he came back for just for the event to be recognized because he was felt really moved and recognized. So this year, EmpowerFest has also presented an opportunity for EMA's executive director to take a more proactive approach also in engaging one of his connections, who's a founder of a tech company in the Bay Area. So another example of why triangulation is so important. It resulted in a $20,000 gift for the event, which in turn presents the opportunity to embark on stewardship and a potential donation renewal. So really shows and illustrates how the different rooms of the House of Development really connect with each other and interweave within your Major Gift program. All right, now next example, Coastal Kicks Soccer. This is another one of our current clients. They are a startup organization established in 2017, who we began working with in 2021. Their mission is to provide a professional and affordable option for youth and communities in Northeast Florida. They're based in Jacksonville. So regardless of income level, want to make sure that these kids receive top quality soccer training and development. And they have a really unique approach to bringing soccer development directly to specific neighborhoods to make them more accessible for families, and have a strong focus on inclusivity and community engagement. So yeah, really empowering environment for kids in the area. So from their very start, they were hyper-focused on ensuring low-cost, high-quality soccer programs and providing financial assistance for kids in need. And in 2022, we encouraged them and supported them in fostering their first annual Soccerthon, which is an event I discussed during our events webinar a few weeks back. But Soccerthon is essentially a one-day event where kids can compete on teams, donors can sponsor a player. It also incorporates fun side event activities and food trucks, so has some festival elements as well there. So had their first one in 2022, raised about $2,000. So you'll see that this first year, they didn't raise an exorbitant amount, which isn't unexpected. Typically, first year events aren't super successful fundraising wise. They're really important though for data gathering purposes, figuring out what worked, what didn't work, and to really create a baseline funding goal year to year. So more important than the funds that came through the event really allowed Coastal Kicks to acquire some major donors and steward them. One donor in particular has really become a supporter beyond just monetary donations. Their parents and the husband is a developer with connections to the city, and he's now working with Coastal Kicks to support them in acquiring different fields, which has been an ongoing challenge in the area. So really critical supporter. So I really like this example as well because it ties in a few elements we've discussed, namely how lower levels of the house, in this case events, feed into the upper levels, major gifts. And also how your work with major donors doesn't just end with the financial transaction, but can and should progress beyond into networking and making broader connections. All right, so next slide here, I want to talk about a bit about how technology plays into your Major Gifts program. Okay, so our first slide here outlines the marketing funnel and associated tactics. So here are some key stages in marketing and your efforts to engage major donors. So first is awareness. So this is when the donor becomes aware of their own need or the problem in general. So for instance, maybe something happens and they are become more aware of the housing crisis and want to engage at some level to resolve the problem, or maybe they feel the need to become more philanthropic in their own personal lives. Next stage is consideration, and at this stage they're thinking about possible solutions to the need. So again, let's say they are maybe feeling the need to be more philanthropic. They might start looking for causes that they care about. Or again, maybe becoming aware of housing insecurity, looking for organizations that are tackling that issue. So they're looking for ways to get involved via donating or volunteering or a combination. Then at the decision stage, they're looking at the solution they chose and are looking for an organization to work with. So in the lens of this frame, you're casting a really wide net to bring people in through this funnel to your organization. And finally, last is funding. Funding is the closing stage where they maybe found your agency, elected to transact and make a donation. All right. So with that funnel in mind, some key technology tools that you'll want to use at each stage. First is awareness. So this entails reaching out through social media and developing different types of graphics in line with that. So it's going to involve using platforms like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. A great tool for graphics, for instance, it's Canva. It's easy to use and free, so it's great for creating specific graphics for those social media platforms. You'll also want to be deploying your website at this stage, bringing people in. If you don't have a website yet, there are a lot of different platforms you can use. Squarespace is one that we see often. Another is Wix, WordPress. So a lot of different options will depend on your price range and needs. At the consideration stage, some tools here are going to be using your website, specifically landing pages and forums, to really have the prospective donor take some kind of action on the page. So they input their information into your system. And without that information, you wouldn't be able to send them follow-up or send them emails or conduct further marketing. And for emails, really there's two main types of email. First is marketing emails, which is really just mass emails to large groups of people. In this case, we are going to focus, for major gifts, we focus more on one-to-one emails for major donors. So getting to know people and setting up meetings. But for mass emails, you can use platforms like MailChimp. And for the second time, for those one-on-one type of emails, you'll want to use your preferred email platform like Gmail, Hotmail. You can also use your CRM. Salesforce, for instance, has a email function that you can utilize for those little more personal emails. And at the decision stage, once you funnel the person down, they've agreed to a meeting, you want to make sure that you prepare the case statement that I mentioned previously. So to make the case compelling, you'll need to, on top and in addition to the storytelling aspect, you'll want to make sure that you have been collecting information on the people you've been helping through your work. So some tools here, potentially Google Sheets, your CRM again. You'll want to make sure that you're tracking impact and storytelling to really support and further your narrative. For financial reporting, to show, again, impact of your donor dollars, how funds are being used. Some tools are going to be QuickBooks, Blackbaud. Those are the most common that we've seen. There's a lot of other tools, again, though. It just depend on, again, your need and your price range. And then for representing this information visually, like pie charts and graphics, you can use resources like Venngage and PictoChart. I think Venngage is free, does, I think, have a paid subscription, but Canva, I think you can create some as well. So all really some helpful tools, kind of helps you understand how technology comes into effect for each of these stages and how that all plays into contributing to your major gifts program. All right. And our last slide here, I want to leave you with a few key takeaways for major gifts. All right. So really 4 things I want to leave you with. First is that major gifts is the most significant contributor to effective fundraising, short and long term. So this is what I think of, or what we consider the 35% rule. So if 70% of the sector or industry contributions come from individuals, 50% of that comes from 5% of the wealthiest individuals in your network. So really massive. And you need to really focus on major gifts. Again, just underpinning that. Second is that your prospects are always generated from current donors. So this is going to lead you to other potential donors via stewardship. And this was uncovered through, for a little background, through longitudinal research by Penelope Burke, a researcher. This is around university and hospital-based major donors over a decade across Canada and the United States. So they came away with one key recommendation or conclusion your prospects are always, again, generated through your current donors. And I will say there are exceptions to this rule. I say always in a general term, but we have seen sometimes someone reaches out to you, does some cold outreach, but it's really the most effective methodology we've found, triangulation and connections. Third key takeaway here, once you create a major gift process, make sure to be consistent with it. As we saw from the data earlier, not only does having a system for moves management really impact your success, it's also critical that you're consistent in using it. And last key takeaway is that it's really critical to implement a hyper-organized process and strategy. So this is speaking to the last few slides of making sure that you're tracking data, tracking your work, and using different tools available to you to really produce your data and draw prospective donors into your network and community. All right, so with that, I want to open it up to Q&A. If there's any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. All right. Okay. Well, Lindsay, if you want to take it away.
All right. Yes, thank you so much, Chelsea, and thank you for joining us today. We will get this posted online soon, and I'll send the link out to everyone who's registered in case you'd like to review it. And we hope to see you all for our next session in about a month on Wednesday, August 23rd at 4 p.m. That'll be our 6th session on planned giving. Have a wonderful evening.